Welcome, and thank you for tuning in live on Facebook and YouTube for our Sunday School weekly lesson presentation. We want to thank our ministry media team headed by Reverend Grady Henderson, assisted ably by Sister Fletcher, and we want to thank Whitestone, of course, for supporting this, and thank you again for tuning in. Our lesson number 57, since we began this series at the start of this pandemic. This is the 8th one for this summer quarter. The subject for this week is Esther goes before the king. Esther goes before the king. You'll discover that her bravery, her faith in God gave her the strength, the inner strength, to do what she needed to do to save her people from pending doom. The Bible text that this subject is based on is Esther, the book of Esther, chapter 4, verse 6, all the way through chapter 5, verse 2. The theme for Esther is God's providential care. God's providential care. The theme for the month is courage facing threats. Summer theme, the summer quarter theme is people of valor. The golden text is verse 16 of that 4th chapter of Esther. And I'll read that. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. These are the words of Esther. And so will I go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. The statement that explains the verse best in my view is found on page 112 of this adult expositor. And Dr. Ann Stotts, one of the commentators for our lesson series, said this: Esther agreed to take the risk, saying, if I perish, I perish, which simply meant that she put her life on the line to help save her people. The lesson is divided into 3 sections. Section 1 is learning of a deadly threat. Learning of a deadly threat. That highlights verses 6 through 9. Verses 6 and 7 highlights Mordecai's report on the plot. And then verses 8 and 9, Mordecai requests to Esther. He told Esther, if you don't act, your people will be doomed and you will die. Section 2, wrestling with personal responsibility. Esther finds herself wrestling, pondering on what should she do. She's doomed if she don't, and she may be doomed if she did. But she trusts God. So that highlights verses 10 through 17. And then verses 10 through 12 highlights Esther's dilemma. And verses 13 and 14 highlights Mordecai's challenge to Esther. And then finally verses 15 and through 17 highlights Esther's decision. Section 3, receiving the king's favor. Ahasuerus was the king that she had to win his favor in order to get him to help save her people. That highlights verses 1 and 2 of chapter 5 of Esther. Verse 1 stresses Esther's risk-laden approach. In other words, unless the king asks you to come in his presence, he could actually kill you. He could destroy you. No one was to approach the king without his approval or pre-approval. But Esther at least stood where he could see her, and then he invited her to come closer. Verse 2 highlights the king's welcoming response. Words and terms defined, or words and terms. And then let me say this, as I like to do, to our superintendent, our current superintendent, under normal circumstances, Sister Carolyn Jean Robinson Brooks, and then our superintendent emeritus, Brother William Baskin. And to all of the teachers, wherever you teach Sunday school, whether it's in California, Mississippi, or Tennessee, or Alabama, Georgia, or Indiana, New York, it doesn't matter. There are words that we need to make sure that we grasp, and that gives you really a good handle and a good understanding of the message or the messages that come through our lesson text. Fast, of course, means to go without food, to abstain from, to refrain from doing normal good things in order to enhance your spiritual strength. Dilemma, if you'll notice in verses 10 through 12, Esther's dilemma. Dilemma means facing a crisis, boxed in, you feel cornered, you feel like you're in a pickle, you're in a rock in a hard place, you're experiencing catch-22, or you're in a tight spot, you're in a jam. Eunuch is a castrated male. Eunuch is a castrated male. It could be a human male, or it could be, in this case, a human male. It could be a male animal, like a bull in stock, among stock. Threat, I've talked about this several times. If you'll notice, there was always a threat coming to God's people. And that means there's a warning, danger is pending. When someone threatens you, that means there's danger brewing. Mordecai was the older cousin of Esther. Mordecai was the older cousin of Esther. Haman, H-A-M-A-N, or H-A-M-A-N, Haman was the rascal, or the one who hatched this plan to have Jewish people destroyed. Decree, he actually secured a decree from the king, which is a legal order, a mandate, a written demand. Only a king could approve such, and only a king could go back on the approval. Esther, of course, was a young Jewish woman, elevated to queen, or to be queen to the Persian Gulf. I'm sorry, to King Ahasuerus. Shushan was a town 150 miles north of the head of the Persian Gulf. King Ahasuerus was the king, or the Persian king. And supplication, you'll notice that means when we beg God humbly for something, we really plead with him, and we beg and we cry. Provinces, area of rule, department or region or section. Inner court is the holy place. When you enter, and back in those ancient times, the outer court was outside of the inner court, and you come through the outer court into the inner court. Then you had walls around where you're in the place where the king is, or where the priest can only occupy. Golden scepter. Golden scepter was a symbol of royal power. Those of you who've read the lesson text, you know that when the king held out the golden scepter, which was a symbol of royal power, she touched it, and everything was fine. And I've already covered. Command means directive or rule, the power to do, the power to dictate. Bade, B-A-D-E, is the past tense of bid, to offer a price, to invite, or to say goodbye. Perish, of course, means to decline, or to decay, or to crumble, destroy. Genocide means a massive race murder. Pogrom, P-O-G-R-O-M, was an organized massacre of helpless people. Now, Sponsler gave us at least 3 points to ponder on page 103. First, genocide has become one of the baleful realities of the 20th and the 21st centuries. Those of us who study history, and if you've gotten through college and graduate school, if you history teacher or any kind of sociology teacher, you know that genocide has been a thing that's been prevalent over the past 2 centuries. The second thing that Sponsler brings to our attention in the introduction section on page 103 is that Hitler, in the 20th century, wanted to destroy all Jewish people and other groups of people. He wanted to be superior. He wanted to be top dog in the whole world. He wanted to rule the world. The third thing he brings to our mind is something that should stick with us, and that is the book of Esther recounts an early example of state-sponsored genocide. Thankfully, the evil was stopped. The fourth point that sticks out in my mind that we find on page 103 in the introduction section is that two people's bravery and faith in God saved a whole lot of people. There are 10 questions on page 107, and I would attempt to give you the answers to the questions, short answers. First question on page 107 is, where did Esther's attendant go to find Mordecai? Answer, short answer. Esther's attendant, Hatachi, Hatach, found Mordecai in the city square in front of the palace gate, page 104. Second question, what information did Mordecai tell Hatachi to lead up to this request? Well, short answer, Mordecai did not hesitate to report all that had recently happened, including the detail of how much money Haman, Haman, who was a rascal, a scoundrel, was willing to pay into the treasury to fund the slaughter of all these people who couldn't defend themselves. He wanted to get rid of all the people that he decided that weren't any good, were useless to society. Page 104. Question number 3. What did Mordecai, speaking through Hatachi, ask Esther to do? Short answer. Hatachi was to urge Esther in the strongest terms, charge, that's in verse 8, typically carries the force of a command in order or a commission to approach the king to beg for mercy for her people. Page 104. Question number 4. Of what did Esther want Mordecai to be aware of, and why? Short answer. Esther wanted to make her cousin aware of the severe danger his charge put her in. No doubt in the hope that he would realize he was asking too much of her and he should find some other way of dealing with the problem. Page 105. Question number 5. What did the king's extending of the golden scepter convey? That person was assured of royal favor and would live. In other words, in that particular time in history, in that ancient world, if you approached the king's presence without him saying you could or him giving you pre-approval, the rule was the king would have you killed instantly. But if he allowed you to come to him, you would live and you would win his favor. Question number 6. What did Mordecai suggest would happen to Esther if she played it safe and kept quiet? Short answer. If Esther kept quiet in this perilous time, as her reply seemed to indicate she intended to do, deliverance for the Jews, these helpless people, would emerge from some other quarter. But she and her relatives would die. Page 106. Question number 7. How was Mordecai so confident that God would save the Jews? Well, short answer. He was expressing faith that God, Mordecai, trusted God. He was expressing faith that God had unlimited resources and would intervene in some way. It's just like us in this century, in July 2021. There are things going on in most of our lives, if not all of our lives, that we wish would go away, that we wish we could solve. Problems, issues in our country, in our world, in our neighborhoods, in our families. And we have to trust God enough to know, do what we can and just assume and trust God enough and have enough confidence that in some kind of way, the part that we can't handle, he's going to work it out some kind of way sooner or later. And that's a powerful trust. Now, question number 8. What did Mordecai want Esther to especially consider regarding God's plans and her responsibility? Short answer. Mordecai wanted Esther to consider one more crucial possibility. She no doubt assumed that she owed her exalted position as queen to her own beauty and the king's attraction to her. But perhaps she had been elevated to her position for some other reason. And basically, I believe God had her prepared for this particular time in history. We are present wherever we are right now, wherever we are seated or standing or walking. This is already ordained by God. We are where we're supposed to be right now. Page 106. Number 9. What request did Esther have for Mordecai in return? Answer. She wanted him to assemble all the Jews living in Shushan and hold a fast together. In other words, go on a diet. Refrain from eating regular food and pray. Fast and pray. Pray and fast. Page 106. Final question, number 10. What was Esther's new attitude toward the risk she would be taking? Short answer, she no longer feared for her own safety. Page 107. A few important points worth our memory. First, on page 108, Ferguson, another one of our commentators, said this: we are to understand always that God's people, we are sometimes put in desperate situations beyond our control. Many of us, if not all of us, in some way or another, we are put in situations in our lives multiple times that's beyond our control. You can't control everything. You can't stop everything. But sometimes we find ourselves in situations that we didn't ask for. Second, we are to rejoice that distressing situations do not mean hopelessness to those who trust in Jesus Christ. A third point Ferguson wants us to keep in mind: we are to remember that when we feel desperate or helpless, we will never go wrong by turning to God. Ferguson added on page 109, and I quote, God was with Esther as she made a daring move to save her people, and he answered the prayer of every Jew in Susa, S-U-S-A, to save the people from the destruction planned by this scoundrel, this deceitful one called Haman, H-A-M-A-N. Dr. Powell on page 110 of this book, I quote, believers then and believers now in this 21st century, July 2021, need to support each other as a family of faith in times of trial. Christians need each other in face of trials. It doesn't matter what's going on, what the crisis is, what the challenge is. We need each other. Hamburg said on the same page this: the book of Esther presents the injustice of Haman's scheme to destroy all the Jews. Dobson on page 111 said this, and I quote, very important, the book of Esther is a story of God's people under threat in Persia. Finally, on page 115 of the Adult Expositor, Robert Winter made two important points for our spiritual understanding and meditation. First, in Esther chapter 3, King Ahasuerus, king of Persia, is deceived by Haman, this rascal, which was his close advisor, into signing an edict or a decree to have all Jews destroyed. The edict could mean order or decree. In our language, we would say signing an order to have all Jews destroyed. Haman was just evil. Second, Winter says this in this section called Children's Corner. He added, we as adults, we as older, mature Christians, we are to help children understand that God does not want them to take foolish, unnecessary risk, but he does want them to be brave in serving him. Basically, my final words, Esther was a person of valor, full of bravery, full of courage, and had strong faith in God. And she loved her people, and she was willing to put her life on the line with God's help to save them. She was endowed with a brave spirit, seasoned with faith in the Lord God. Thank you, and God bless you, and I hope that you will join us in worship at 11 o'clock today.